Morning. We are on to the last prose piece and the longest for the last, To Build a Fire by Jack London. And also, Jack London happens to be one of my favorite authors. Yes. So now I'm going to go through this with basic details. I'm not going to read the story naturally. Details about when the story was published, all in the text. But what is important for us to know is the setting. So here we are talking about the the Klondike gold rush, which began around the 1897, and it's information readily found that in 1896, George Cormack. At Rabbit Creek. That's a place of the Klondike and the Yukon rivers in the northwestern part of Canada. Discovered this rich deposit of gold, and so there was a rush to this Canada's Klondike region a year later, and many of the prospectors who came. Jack London himself spent a lot of time both in Alaska and in Canada, and in this story, To Build a Fire, he writes about this Yukon Trail. Yes, so if you look at the trail, which is on page 35 of the text, he writes about the trail, the Yukon Trail, which is the main trail that led. I'm towards the end of the second paragraph. The main trail that led um, south 500 miles to the Chilkoot Pass. That's another place, the setting, and the Daia and the salt water. So then again, 70 miles north to Dawson, and then north 1,000 miles to Nulato. Yes, and finally to St. Michael on Bering Sea. So you see, this entire route is what we find, and of course, if you turn to page 36, you will have the Henderson Creek, where the man here is trying to reach, which is very close to the divide from the Indian Creek country. So that is his destination. So you see, the setting is extremely important, and uh, and Jack London's personal experience is beautifully uh, delineated here. But there is an important theme behind this, and if I talk to you about the theme, then it is not just to look for the gold, but this theme is about the need of the humankind to find some meaning in this entire challenge of a solitary existence in an environment which is hostile, an environment which is indifferent to his pain and suffering. So the setting, which is so challenging, is what Jack London portrayed. um, the relationship between two characters in the story, man and the dog, which again highlights the theme of probably how difficult solitary existence is, and also a lot of irony about how man sees the surroundings and how the dog, who is an integral part of the story, sees the surrounding. So you see, the this contrast here is very important. The isolation of the individual in this extremely indifferent and hostile setting that it is the basic theme. Yes, so it is a lonely man, and you see, this man has not been given a name. He is called, as you see on page 36 36, it's called the Chechequa, I mean, a newcomer to this trail. Yes, so he's just a newcomer. It could be any man, it could be Jack London himself. Yes, so the lone man, the solitary man, he's traveling across an extremely unfamiliar and indifferent um, expanse of this trail. Yes, and he learns what cruelty of nature is, a cruelty that he sort of neglected. Yes, and at the very end, the realization that it brings about is what is the ironical about the story. Yes, so probably apart from this, the contrast between man and the dog, is what London speaks again in this story, which implies that the animals, they survive uh, through instinct. So the focus here on the instinct of the animals, right? And man, he believes he knows everything. He believes he has a good judgment, he has got a good knowledge of the surroundings. So, and this belief uh, of the vast knowledge that he has is exposed as a very limited capacity, yes, to to win over extremely hostile environment. Yes, so that emotional insight that uh, he tries to work with overpowers, cannot be overpowered by his strong determination that he can succeed no matter what is told to him. And there is in this story the man at the Sulphur Creek, and it keeps coming back to him. The man at the Sulphur Creek warned him that it is very difficult, it is very hostile, do not go alone. He did not bother, because this entire the egoistic belief in I can do no wrong and I have every kind of knowledge is something that at the end betrays, yes, uh, his betrays his entire sense of being human, right? So, if we look at the setting, the wilderness of the frozen Yukon, um, very harsh winter, and as you can see the little descriptions as you read it, there's no hint of a sun. It was very cold, and he did not have a companion. He was told again and again, please do take a companion, but he decided not to. Yes, and he's just a man. Jack London has not given him a name, like I told you. So that sort of takes him so many steps away from where we are reading it, and also isolating him in this very hostile setting that we find. Yes, and of course, that there are various details about the story. I will go through it in a nutshell so that you know the key concepts that you key paragraphs and key thoughts that you need to. So if you look at page 36, you find in the very first paragraph is the assessment of the motivation of this man. Yes, it's very very important. He's using reason, yes, and not imagination to understand his surroundings. That is the crux of the opening paragraph on page 36. And the end, how this proves so adverse to the, as you see the outcome of the story is proven. So using reason and not imagination to get past this crisis does not pay off. Yes. So you must remember that imagination is necessary to understand our limitations. So if you don't use imagination, we will never accept our limitations. If you only use reason, and that is the crux of the tragedy here, right? Also, probably the entire casual manner in which he went about, spatting here, looking here, this casual approach shows his inability to use his imagination, inability to use his to recognize a danger lurking. Yes, which in contrast the dog did. He was tense. He knew, he felt the temperature was minus 75 Fahrenheit, minus 75, and the dog really sensed that intensity of it. And that is on page 37, third paragraph. Here you will have the contrast. In the middle of it, in the middle of the third paragraph, the dog did not know about thermometers. Possibly in its brain there was no sharp consciousness of a condition of very cold, such as was in the man's brain. But the brute had its instinct. It experienced a vague but menacing apprehension that subdued it and made it slink along at the man's knees. Yes. Why do you think the dog was with the man? Because man is the source of fire. Yes. And fire is what keeps one warm and alive in this cold climate that they are in. So he has to be with the man, right? But the contrast again is extremely important, middle of page 37. Uh, Building a fire, that's a story. So on page 41, please go to page 41. That is the first fire that was successfully built to warm himself while he was having lunch. Page 41, that's the first fire. Got it? All right. Then if you turn page 42, third paragraph, the second attempt. I call it an attempt because if you read it, you'll know that it failed. It was a second attempt. You'll have the details here, you know how it failed. And then on page 45, again, third paragraph. No, sorry, did I miss out something? Yeah, no, that was second. Yeah, that's fine. The third, page 45, third paragraph is the third attempt. Third and final failed attempt. So he actually built a fire only once. Only once. The second and third were only attempts. And they ended in a tragedy, right? So the three attempts, the first successful, the other two not, you have to know. That's why I have identified it for you where exactly they are and the details. I'm not going to go through the details. You please go through the details. Page 41, second paragraph, the first attempt. Page 42, the third paragraph, the first attempt successful. Page 42, third paragraph, second attempt unsuccessful. Page 45, third paragraph, the third attempt unsuccessful. Right? Okay, now I'm going to go through the story in a nutshell as I'm going to narrate it to you. Yes, it is a story of a bitterly cold journey, the Yukon River in Canada, and it takes place in the course of one day, a single day, right? And it begins at 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, when the man is standing and is looking across to the trail, and he's sort of estimating that he should, under the normal circumstances, reach the camp where the boys are, where the rest of the crowd is, at about 6 o'clock in the evening. Yes, so he walks along that trail, unknowing to him, like I said, the temperature has reached minus 75 degrees Fahrenheit. A temperature that the dog, who cannot read a thermometer, senses danger, but the man does not. He is walking on. Yes, so what do? They walk their way through the divide in the stream, yes, and he decides to have his lunch. So, but remember one thing, each time when he's walking, he's testing the ice in case, because that there could be a very thin ice cover, and it could crash and he could fall through into the freezing water, and that would be the end. So he's testing the thickness of the ice at times, and many a times, when he's unsure, he's also pushing the dog forward. Yes, like when we have experiments, what do? We do it on animals, right? So he makes the dog walk ahead and sort of testing it out. So if the dog falls, he knows he will not walk that way. Mean, very mean, but survival. You see, when it comes to survival, one forgets about what will I call it? Care, respect, camaraderie, which is most essential in such times. Men forget that because it is the survival of the fittest. So I'll sacrifice everybody. I'll sacrifice the dog. And a point comes when the dog falls through. It actually falls through, and of course the man helps the dog out and removes the ice. But when he's removing it, he realizes how bitter cold it is. Yes, and then the next timing is about 12:30. They arrive at the divide of the creek. Yes, and that's where they stop for lunch. And the first, that's what I told you on page 42, when he builds the first fire, when he's having lunch, and it's twigs and bark and protection, and the fire is lit, it's warm. uh, he enjoys the lunch. He's sitting there, and when he's sitting there for the first time, uh, I'm just reading out a few lines. He filled his pipe, took his comfortable time over the smoke. Possibly all the generations of his ancestry had been ignorant of cold, a cold of 107 degrees below freezing point. But the dog knew, all his ancestry knew. It had inherited the knowledge. Yes. But there was no intimacy between the dog and the man. And uh, what is very important also, that the man, he sat back thinking comfortably about that man from Sulphur Creek, had spoken the truth when telling him how cold it sometimes got in the country. And he had laughed at him at that time. That showed one must not be too sure of things. There was no mistake about it. It was cold. So, probably gradually, when and better circumstances, he had laughed off at what the man had told him at Sulphur Creek. But sitting there beside the fire to warm himself, he realized probably he was right. Yes, probably he was right. So that was the first um, successful attempt. Okay, but then he decides to resume the hike, and and you see here that the dog does not want to leave the fire, but he's doesn't have a choice, so they move on, and they've been walking for about half an hour. Walking, the man suddenly falls through the ice, which soaks him right up to the knees. Yes, and that's when he realizes that he has to build another fire to dry himself. Otherwise, he'll be numbed. He will not be able to walk. Yes, and he is at risk of losing his fingers, his toes to the frost. Uh, so he quickly builds a fire with all the little firewood, and he builds it under the tree. And he once the fire starts, he removes his shoes. The fire does start, yes, but in his general hurry to build up the fire, he starts pulling the twigs off the branch. He actually dislodges, yes, a branch over his head, and there is an entire pile of snow which was balanced on top of the branch, falls straight down onto the fire and buries it. Yes. So you see, in his general excitement, he had forgotten. No, not excitement. I won't call it excitement. The general anxiety to get the fire so that he could warm himself, he forgot a cardinal principle: never build a fire under a branch of a tree. You will dislodge all the snow on the top, and that's exactly what happened. But he knew that he had to build a second fire. Second after this. It's actually the third attempt. So he goes to another place. He gathers new material because he has to have a fire to warm himself. Otherwise, it's sure death. So he gets the new materials. Gradually his fingers are getting numb. He can hardly grasp the dry bark of the to start the fire. He can hardly hold the matches. So he swings his arm, trying to get some blood back into the circulation so that he can move his fingers. Yes, some feeling in his fingers has to come back. And then he suddenly takes the pack of matches from inside. He can hardly feel the matches. Yes, gradually the fear is setting in that this kind of numbness will not help him to move. So he sort of maneuvers himself. If you read the description, he maneuvers himself with his hands, manages to get a single match with his teeth, so takes out a match. Uh, the first one drops. He gathers another one across. He's somehow pulling one out from across his leg, succeeds in lighting it with much effort. Yes, then he holds it with his. He holds the match to the tree bark. It's very close to his face, and this entire smoke enters his nose, and he's coughing. And what happens as a result of that? The matchstick drops into the snow. Yes, he's so desperate, he pulls the entire box of the 17 matches. They all light up at the same time. Yes, they start burning his hand, but he's is insensitive to the burn, because it's sort of, it's painful, but it's actually releasing the numbness. And then suddenly when the bark catches fire, 70 matches, he drops the matches. Yes. And then begins building the fire with any material he can find. Yes. But what happens is, anything that he finds, a large piece of wet moss falls onto the fire. Shaking, in this bitterness, he tries to push it away, but the whole thing, the matches, the barks, everything flies all over, and the fire is extinguished. And what is the dog doing in this? The dog is watching with great anxiety, because he knows he can't build a fire. He depends on man for this fire. Remember, did you see? I'm sure you've seen the movie. You see, now for a second I forget about the entire concept of fire, which is the most powerful tool of man, which is in Mowgli. Yes. So when he's reminded that he's a human cub, and the greatest strength that the human world has is the power of fire. Yes, the red flower, they call it. Yes. So this, and I'm sure all of you have seen um, this entire beautiful movie. Um, and So the power of fire is something that, for which animals are also indebted to us, because that's a means of survival. Yes. Okay. So uh, now what happens here is, uh, the man has to survive, right? And now he realizes he's run out of matchsticks. So a thought in his mind comes: what happens if he kills the dog? Use his body heat to get back the feeling in his hands. Yes. But the dog is very instinctive. He senses there is something wrong with the way the man is calling the dog, and he tries to move away. Yes. But the man manages to call the dog over and traps it in his arms. But then what he realizes, that he's too weak to kill the dog. He cannot forget about strangling the dog. He cannot even hold the knife. He will not be able to kill the dog. So the reason why he does not kill the dog is not because of the feelings in his heart, but because he does not have the physical strength to do it. He cannot wield a knife, he cannot strangle the dog. So he frees the dog. Yes. Very selfish, right? Very, very painful realization of what man can become when he's thinking about survival. Yes. The next part is when he's desperate. He knows he has to reach Henderson Creek. So he's running. He just begins to run along the camp, along the trail, yes, towards the camp. This definitely warms him up, but he falls several times because he doesn't have the energy. And finally, when he falls down, he realizes that there is warmth, but there is numbness, yes. His body is freezing, yes. He gets up again and starts running. The dog is at his heels. He falls again. You see, there is no energy. Is the inclement weather, the lack of stamina, there is no blood coursing down his around his veins. Nothing is happening. He doesn't have the energy to do it. He falls second time. Second time he falls. This time he does not get up. He cannot get up. Yes, but it is ironical that though he cannot get up, there is a sense of calmness. He accepts death. So in his mind, then he's thinking about the his friends, the boys who would find his body the next day. Yes, who would then bring his body back. he starts thinking about the old timer on Sulphur Creek. Yes, and that's on page 47 when he says, he thought in the moment of controlled despair, a man should travel with a partner. So you see there are different moments where these thoughts come to his mind about how he disregarded all advice that was given to him. And that comes to him when he's lying on the face of death. And he says, that's on page 51, you were right, old horse, you were right. The man mumbled to the old timer of Sulphur Creek, you were right. I should not have traveled alone. I should not have underestimated the meaning of freezing cold. What you said was right. So he's drifting. This is hallucinating because he's gradually losing consciousness. So he's drifting into the world where he sees his friends, the other boys waiting for him at Henderson Creek. He's drifting into the world of the old man, the old timer, not old man, the old timer on Sulphur Creek who had given him such good advice which he disregarded. So, that at the end, the realization that I have disobeyed, disregarded people who tried to help me, yes, who tried to warn him against traveling alone. What does the dog do? He has not left the man's side, yes, as the man lies down. He's watching, keeps watching till the man eventually dies, and then it howls. That is the final cry that the man I was with is no more, yes, and it runs away. It runs away from the body, yes, and it runs towards the camp. Why? Because that's where he knows there are other men who are going to provide him food and fire for the warmth. And the dog is going to follow his instinct and he is going to reach the camp. That is important, yes. If probably the man had not been so proud about all that he knew, he could have used the experience of the dog, yes, and reached the camp, which he did not. He sort of just went on. And you see the last part, he crept close to the man and caught the scent of death. This made the animal bristle and back away. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leaped and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and trotted up the trail in the direction of the camp. It knew, it knows, the dog knows, where were the other food providers and fire providers. That's where he would go. So, this entire theme, you see, of the struggle between man and nature, very important theme, man and nature. And it's a survival under extreme conditions, right? When the dog knows that it has to be near the fire, the dog knows that it has to lie in the hole in the snow, but the man is not ready to accept that the cold is a serious danger. Oh, it can fight the cold. It has matches. It has the bark of tree to light a fire. Yes, it is difficult to endure, but it is not a danger. Yes. So the contrast is very, very important, yes, because man believes that he is impervious to danger, yes, like at this time and age, we thought we were impervious to any kind of virus, right? What has happened? Nature has taught us that we still don't know so much about what there is in nature, yes. So the dissonance, you can say, of man's ability here in this story to apply the knowledge, his instincts to a certain extent for survival under extreme condition is so evident. There's an extreme dissonance. It just does not happen. So that's what I said. When you don't allow imagination and only reason to work, there will be dissonance. Yes, and so the dichotomy is between instinct, imagination, and intellect and reasoning, right? So dog and man. Dog is instinctive, uses his imagination. Man is intellectual, uses his reasoning. Which one is successful? You can answer it. Yes, imagination and instinct. So the innate understanding is what is so vitally important. Don't try to always read and find out instinctively. The gut feeling at times will sort of give you probably the will probably give you the correct view of what is going to happen. The consequences will be clear. That's why at the end of the story, the dog is alive. Yes, the man's body lies in the snow. Yes. So you see, each time this man who he tries to assert his ability to travel alone, believes he's capable of surviving the extreme wintry condition, his refusal to travel with a companion despite the warnings of the man at Sulphur Creek inevitably leads to his doom, right? Absolutely. Because nature, remember, is unforgiving. Nature is unforgiving. We have to accept, yes. So, like it's given here, if only he had a trail mate, he would not have been in danger. Yes. So his realization does come each time. When does it come? It doesn't come when he has the opportunity to redeem himself. It comes when he has lost it all. It comes when he loses the matches. All the 70 matches burn and they are lost under the moss that descends on it. Yes, that's when he realizes. That's when he realizes his individual capabilities will not ensure his survival. It's too late, isn't it? So uh, you might say that this man about whom we do not have much information. We, of course, we know that he's an American. He's inexperienced with this harshness of this cold Canadian weather in the Alaska. Yes, his first winter, and he's a newcomer. Chechequa, yes, a newcomer. So a novice is so understandable. A proud novice ends up dying in the face of the cold wind, right? So the man who underestimates the dangers, the man who doesn't believe he needs any help, the man who doesn't acknowledge how difficult, how unforgiving nature is, makes one poor decision after another, yes, which leads naturally inevitability of death, right? In contrast, you have the dog. The dog is described as a big native husky, which is a typical dog, a wolf dog. It has the very thick fur to protect itself from very cold winter, and it follows the man along the trail. Yes, without him throughout, with him throughout the journey. He's nameless again. Probably all huskies are like that. Yes, grey coated. Uh, he looks like every other husky that you will find in that part of the Yukon Trail. Yes, of course we have not been told how they met, but probably he found the dog at the Sulphur Creek himself. Yes, uh, so one was a slave to the other. Yes, uh, they're just dependent on each other. I mean, the dog depended on the man to provide him the fire, to give him the comfort, and for the man, the dog, of course, was as an obedient and submissive to the man, so a kind of partner, and he felt the dog was enough companion to take him through the journey. Yes, but remember, all through the story, the dog is a symbol of the instinct that leads to survival, in opposition to the reasoning and intellect of man that leads to death. So the contrast is very, very important. Yes. So like I read to you about the contrast that is there on about the thermometer on page 36. It's very, very important about the contrast between the man and the dog in this theme. Yes. Um, there is one voice of reason. There is a dog instinct. There is a man who is reason without imagination. But there is one voice of reason which is with instinct, and that is unseen character, only referred to as the old man of the Sulphur Creek, right? An old man here is a man of experience, um, whose role here is to show to you and establish the absolute inexperience and naivety of this foolish adventurer who tries to go across this absolutely inclement weather to reach his destination, right? So, uh, this the third voice is very, very important in this story, and it comes back to haunt him at different junctures. The first one, remember, when he ridicules, when the fire has been lit, he's happy and comfortable. But say after that, till the very end, it is with remorse that he remembers that he did not heed uh, to what was said. Yes. Uh, so you see, you have the plot. You do have the characters. Yes, it is. If you follow the concept of what a tragedy is, it leads to death. Yes, it leads to death. It leads to tragedy. But the theme here, which I would believe is more about the motive of the journey. Yes, this entire thing is about um, of very vivid, very realistic attempt of the realization that it is not easy for man uh, to survive in the face of uh, nature with its strong uh, and absolutely unimaginable power that it possesses within itself in every way. Yes. So uh, it's sort of a very strong theme uh, of a journey which is of a primitive, if I use the theme of a primitive struggle for survival. Yes, and like there is, of course, a very deep richness of meaning which is below the literal narration, and this, of course, is based on this entire concept of instinct, intellect, imagination, and reasoning, man and the dog, right? Yeah. Please do give a good read to the story. There is a beautiful um, movie that I would suggest that you watch. Please do watch it. It's not about, I think to build a fire also you have a video that you can watch. Apart from that, there is one movie which I would recommend each and every one of you to watch. It is called Togo. Togo, yes, a story about a relationship between again husky, straight from Alaska, and also based on a gold seeker. The story of a man who is a gold seeker and his dog Togo, which is a true story. Please, please do watch it. I think it is on Prime Video. Yes, if you can, do watch it. It's just brilliant. The movie is. All right, now as usual, we will. I have to. I said I'm going to just have one class of this, I need to show you the questions. Oh God, now this is not starting, so you have to pardon me. I'll show you the question. There's something gone wrong with this other laptop of mine. Probably the uh, power. There's some problem with the power. So I shall put up the questions again, maybe a short lesson of the questions, and I will leave you. It's based on total narration, so it should not be a problem at all to answer the questions. I will send it across. You will see a short video with all the questions, and maybe I'll put up a few points that you need to remember while you are addressing the questions. So it'll be a different kind of a final video for to build a fire, right? All right. See you then, and don't forget, do watch the movie Togo.